That's a beautiful church. I think it's the second biggest church in Rome, and it's quite gorgeous. Along the top, when we get to the second church, notice along the top there are medallions of all the popes. So you have, starting with Peter, you can see Peter, Linus, Cletus, Clement, and you go all the way around the church and through these different areas, and you come all the way to Benedict, and I'm very curious to see if they've got Pope Francis up yet. How long that will take to get Pope Francis up. He wasn't up there a month ago when we were here yet, so we don't know yet, but we'll see. And another thing I like about this church is that it has the whole story of St. Paul's life. Underneath the medallions, if you look at, there's another row in the whole nave of the whole life of St. Paul in beautiful mosaics. And there's a book actually that has all those mosaics. And you can start with his life and his conversion and follow the whole story of his life to his martyrdom. And that's very nice too. And then there is a chapel to St. Stephen there, inside the Church of St. Paul outside the walls. And if you watched my movie, I make a point of why they have that, because the church, St. Augustine I should say, said if it were not for the prayers of St. Stephen when he was being martyred, we would not have the St. Paul. The church would not have St. Paul. It was the prayers of Stephen that converted St. Paul. And so that's why we have a chapel there honoring Stephen and his prayers and his martyrdom that was able to bring Paul into the church. And then we're going to go to another church called St. John Lateran. These are two of the most important churches in Rome. And St. John Lateran is the mother church of the world. We'll look at the medallions as you go in the door. There's a medallion on each side, carved right into the wall, the outdoor exterior of the building. And it says this is the mother church of Rome, because it's the cathedral church of Rome. And it's also the mother church of the world. You know what cathedral means? Every bishop has a chair. The chair is called a cathedra, and the cathedra is in the cathedral. That's how it's an easy way to remember it. A cathedral is a church that has the chair of the bishop. Since this is the bishop of Rome, it is the chair of Peter. It's also the chair of the world. And you'll be able to see that today. And what I'm going to do is take the microphone away from the guides once in a while, because I know some of the things that you like to see and hear that they may not know. But I love typology, which is something in the Old Testament which is fulfilled in the New Testament. And the beauty of this is all through the nave of St. John Lateran is on one side you have Moses crossing the Red Sea, and on the other side you have Jesus being baptized in the Jordan. So you have back and forth, but the story being told between Old Testament and New Testament, parallels back and forth. And this is really a fun thing to do, and I'm going to go through and show you that. And there's some wonderful relics in that church too, St. John Lateran. There's the heads of Peter and Paul. They're in a gold reliquary above the altar. There's two gold heads, and inside those heads are the bones, and one of Peter and the other is the bones of Paul. There's also the table from the Last Supper is in this church, and so it's quite a place.
Steve?
Yes?
How did it happen that both Peter and Paul were in Rome at the same time? Were they like pals? They just
No, Nero brought them back. Nero got them.
They were under arrest.
Yeah, they were pals towards the end, and people think that they were fighting and they didn't get along. And Paul says, one time I confronted Peter to his face and called him a hypocrite, and everybody said, ooh, then that means he can't be infallible, because Paul criticized him, and obviously those two guys weren't very good. Paul went out and started all the independent Baptist churches, and Peter went out and started all the independent other churches, and they split, but this is nonsense. When Paul went to Jerusalem, he never calls Peter Simon. That could have been a way to diss Peter, kind of put him in his place. Call him Simon, which was his Jewish name. What does he call him? Every time he mentions Peter, he said, I went up to see Cephas, which is the Aramaic word for rock. I went up to see the rock. I went up to visit the rock. I spent 2 weeks with no one else, only with the rock. And I received the right hand of fellowship from the church to ensure that I was not preaching in vain. In other words, I went there to meet with Peter and the other apostles, to present to them what I was doing and to receive their authority and commission so that I was not wasting my time. He recognized the authority of the church and Peter. So they got along good, and then what happened is Peter did a lot of traveling. In my book, Upon This Rock, I go through a lot of that and, kind of speculating based on little bits of information here and there. Paul was imprisoned in 62 AD, and that's how the book of Acts ends, with him being 2 years in house arrest in Rome, and then he's set free, and he goes out for another 5 years, which is not in the New Testament. And he goes out and he does a lot of preaching and teaching. Again, goes to Ephesus, Corinth, and Spain. And then in 67 AD, Nero, after Rome burned, he made the Christians the scapegoat. And he arrested Peter and Paul and brought them into the Mamertine prison, because what you do is you always go for the top guy, because then you can teach everyone else a lesson. They go for the top guys, and some of the early church writers say that they were killed on the same day. Peter taken to the Vatican, which was outside the city walls, on the other side of the Tiber River, which was outside the city walls at the time, and there they crucified Peter upside down. Actually, Peter was leaving Rome, and he met Jesus on the way, and there's a church called Quo Vadis, and Peter says, "Where are you going, Lord?" And he says, "Because you're denying me again, I'm going back to die again." And Peter was heartbroken and turned around and went back in and was crucified upside down. We know exactly the place, right in St. Peter's, where that happened. There's a chapel there called the Chapel of the Crucifixion of Peter. It's an exact geographical location where he was crucified upside down. And so they were both killed on the same day, and Paul was taken outside these city walls out this way, and he knew that he was going out there to be killed. He had no doubt about that. They're going to cut off his head. That's why in the prison he wrote 2 Timothy, and it's his last will and testament to his son in the faith, who had been faithfully by his side from the very beginning. Timothy was such a faithful, he was a young Greek and half Jew, who was circumcised and became one of Paul's followers to avoid the problems with the Jews. And he was loyal and faithful, very timid. That's why Paul says, don't be afraid. He's always telling him to be more courageous, more bold, don't be afraid. And by the way, there's relics of Timothy buried with St. Paul here at the Church of Paul outside the walls. This is where the relics of Timothy are as well, because he was his faithful son in the faith. And he commissioned him then to go out and keep things going, him and Titus and Silas and some others. And they did a good job, because here we are today. They did a good job.